this is just the reality of language, which is something I found really fascinating as I kind of dove into natural language processing. Language is inherently ambiguous, and it's very difficult to get two humans to agree on things.
Welcome to Unnatural Selection, a show about competition, innovation, and the strategies shaping tomorrow's frontiers. I'm Nick Encina. Each week, we speak with pioneers shaping the future.
This is episode number 19. Today, we're looking at something most people never see, but every healthcare system depends on: reporting. Not discovery, not treatment. The work of proving what happened, when it happened, and whether it worked. In this episode, we explore what changes when that burden starts to lift, how automation reshapes trust, why oversight still matters, and what happens when clinicians get time and attention back. Our guest is Dr. Danielle Bitterman. Danielle Bitterman is an assistant professor at Harvard Medical School who is dedicated to developing and implementing advances in natural language processing and large language models for safe, equitable healthcare. She is faculty in the Artificial Intelligence in Medicine program at Mass General Brigham and a radiation oncologist at Brigham and Women's Hospital. Her expertise includes language model evaluation and risk monitoring, information extraction from the electronic health records, and translational studies of AI in the clinic. Dr. Bitterman's research has been published in high-impact venues spanning medicine and computer science, including Nature Medicine, Lancet Digital Health, the Journal of Clinical Oncology, and NERS. Let's go.
Danielle, welcome to Unnatural Selection.
Thanks so much for having me. Really glad to be here.
I always get started with the same level-setting question, so people hear from your perspective what the context around the work that you do. With that, Danielle, please let us know what need or impact drives your work, and how do you view your role in addressing it?
Sure. Yeah. So the need for my work comes directly from what I see in clinic every day is that even though survival for cancer has improved dramatically over the past decades, there's still so many patients who desperately need new treatments now or as soon as possible. And clinical trials is the gold standard way that we identify the most promising treatments and get those into clinic so to serve our patients. Um, but clinical trials, while so important and so critical, are very intensive, very costly, and often kind of fail due to protocol deviations and kind of just issues with running these trials. When a patient's enrolled on a clinical trial, we have big research staff at the hospital sites that are whose role it is to uh, collect all of the information on what happens to that patient so that we can ultimately know whether the new treatment is beneficial, equal or more harmful compared to the current standard of care. And that takes huge amounts of time. It's one of the biggest drivers of cost and one of the biggest items that kind of, slows down and in some cases impacts the quality of the data that we collect. And so really since very early in my clinical career, I was almost become kind of very focused and driven on this one challenge of how do we have electronic medical records. Theoretically, we should be able to improve this process because of the digitization of the medical records, but we're still kind of acting as if we're documenting and collecting results at uh, before the EHR transition. There's just so much room for kind of transforming this process and making clinical trials faster, higher quality, and lower costs, which will ultimately translate to better treatments, getting better treatments faster to patients, and for ultimately lower costs for the patients as well.
Interesting. So you're focusing primarily on the clinical reporting problem in the clinical trial setting. Is the poor quality of clinical reporting, is it a technical problem, a systems issue, or something deeper like maybe a cultural mismatch between research and care?
That's such a good question. And I'll kind of focus on what we're right now laser focused on, which is specifically the adverse event reporting, which is particularly challenging because on a clinical trial, in a cancer clinical trial, generally you have to collect every adverse event that occurs in that patient. And the potential list of adverse events is very, very long, at serial time points over months of their care, sometimes over years of their care. And so it's both a technical and, as you mentioned, a cultural problem. From a technical side, I'll start with the kind of I don't know if cultural is the right word, just the kind of mismatch between clinical care and research. And I think that's probably the most foundational. Um, uh, Providers are primarily documenting in the medical records for the purposes of providing care to that patient. Secondarily, that's a source for that for outcomes. So there's often ambiguity in the language used to describe the adverse events. The timing of it is often ambiguous, and the severity of it might be ambiguous. So that's a kind of cultural and kind of again, cultural is the wrong word. That's kind of just a mismatch of how we collect adverse events for many trials, not for all, but for
It's
many.
and skills too, right? I mean, clinicians aren't necessarily trained in research and vice versa.
Exactly. Right. Right. And it's not, the PI of the study is not the person who's providing the direct care for every single patient on that trial. And it's frankly probably not realistic to have every clinician constantly having a dual priorities of research reporting and clinical care. We want our clinicians to have clinical care as their number one priority. So trying to kind of flip their roles um, I don't believe is the solution. But supporting them and being able to ensure that we're clarifying and support and as much as possible, uh, documenting in a way that that will downstream help the reporting. That's something that I think we can really make inroads in that kind of communication of what's happening to the patient. From the more technical side, studies have shown that there's and we've shown in we have our study that we are working on is developing methods for immunotherapy related adverse event extraction. This is a study that's an NIH funded study. We've shown that humans, expert humans, disagree up to 50% of the time and kind of what adverse event is even present. That's partially due to the ambiguity of the language and partially due to this is just the reality of language, which is something I found really fascinating as I kind of dove into natural language processing. Language is inherently ambiguous and, it's very difficult to get two humans to agree on things. So while we might not ever, we can improve that agreement, we likely won't ever achieve 100% agreement. But if we could at least collect that in a consistent way, that I believe would be an improvement in terms of understanding what's really happening to patients at scale.
That's interesting. So, when you're talking about the disagreement in language, you're talking about two trained professionals that are looking at the same thing, but interpreting it in different ways. And are we talking about slight variations where there could be a mapping that says this is a synonym of that? Or are we talking about two totally different things?
So it's a range. It's a range. More commonly, it's more kind of uh, I would say smaller scale, but things that can end up having a big difference. So, is this patient having a CTCAE grade 2 adverse event, a moderate adverse event, or grade 3 adverse event, which is severe? There's oftentimes room for differences in interpreting how those guidelines of whether that's an adverse event is moderate or severe. That might seem minor, but oftentimes clinical trials then report, will report only the rate of grade 3 or greater adverse events. So then you're missing if something that one person might have called a grade 3 ends up being recorded as a grade 2, you're not that's gonna that might end up not showing up in the final report for that study. So
Mm,
even though it seems minor, in some cases it has important consequences for the interpretation of the study. So
totally. I'm sorry, I was going to ask, does that imply also that there might be an issue in the input of records? Because if they disagree on necessarily how to interpret some of the symptoms, AI can comb through the data and clean it up and report. But how do we address the issue of maybe some things not being reported at all?
great question. Yeah. So just relying on what's currently in there can't catch things that aren't reported. So that's where I view in the future next step of this project, which we haven't gotten to yet, but where we are taking it next is okay, once you're able to improve the current standard reporting, what you're referring to is patient-reported outcome reporting, I believe, which is very important and being used in many places, but there are real technical challenges with that too. Not every patient has access, easy access, or patients who are on with cancer and clinical trials don't always have the time to do huge amounts of patient-reported outcome reporting. But now with large language models, there potentially opens an avenue where you could look at the records, see what things seem to really be missing, and then in a more targeted fashion and a more easy to use conversational fashion, potentially reach out to those patients or reach out to the clinicians. Now, this is where I think we need to sit with patients and clinicians, and we're planning to do this to understand how would they really want that implemented so it doesn't provide, this is an issue with technology. There's a huge amount of potential, but it also can create new burdens and we don't want to shift a lot of burden onto patients who are enrolled in trial. So we need to figure out that balance, and that's going to require real engagement with the people who are both the patients and clinicians involved in trials.
Yeah, no, and I was actually thinking about the clinicians, right? So if there's disagreement between two experts that disagree on symptoms or the nomenclature, is there also potential for one clinician to misinterpret a symptom or and not record it properly? So the input from a professional or comparison between professionals, you might be missing some data because they're not all reporting it the same or reporting it at all.
Yes, I see what you mean. Yes, that absolutely that happens. Where I have colleagues who've done studies looking at uh, disagreements on whether the attribution side, whether the side effect is due to immunotherapy or due to something else, and oftentimes there's a lot of disagreement there, and it doesn't end up being accounted for until after the, weeks after that adverse event occurred, sometimes after all the data has been collected. And then, the central site might go back and look for records. Um, but there is a lot of that, um, there is, that's a bottleneck in terms of you can't have a central site reviewing every single page of every single uh, patient of records for every single patient who has been um, we don't want to totally duplicate the manual reporting process both at the site and at the main site or whoever is doing the auditing. So yeah, information can drop out at that point as well.
Yeah, and potentially you can use these advanced models to help fill in the gaps, right? So if you start seeing some patterns downstream, you could potentially prompt the clinician at the next visit to say, "Hey, by the way, ask this patient if they have a headache or any number of symptoms that might explain how they went from point A to point C without a B in there."
Right, precisely. Yes, that's much more eloquently what I was referring to when you can kind of then prompt support the clinicians in documenting and collecting enough information. Or, oh, this person's, maybe you might want to think about ordering a test that could confirm or at least provide more suggested evidence for what's really happening to that patient.
And are there types of information that AI consistently misses or misinterprets in oncology records that makes your job obviously it'll clean up some human elements, but then what are the biggest challenges in cleaning up this data from a technology standpoint?
Hmm, hmm. So, let me think for one moment. One,
Like, could it be like adverse reactions or progression-free survival rates and so on?
So we're really right now focusing on the adverse reactions. Um, the models, our system that we've developed with which has required, after, it did require some effort to build it, performs well, performs um with, right now about 98%. So it actually is very good at finding the adverse events. What we're moving on to now is doing the grading, how severe it is, which I had mentioned is hard for humans. That's certainly more challenging for models, but it's also more challenging for humans. So it's hard to know if that's a uniquely technologic aspect. Sometimes as you said, that it's not, there isn't enough information documented at present in the medical records to really clarify. But that does require systems that embed kind of clinical knowledge into the LLMs, beyond kind of what the generalist LLMs can do. This is why, we can't just use ChatGPT out of the box to do it. It doesn't perform well at that because that's a generalist model. It hasn't been developed and engineered in a way that kind of aligns with the specifics of how we run cancer clinical trials.
How do clinicians actually interact with the AI in the system? Is it transparent to them, or is it something that they're actively engaging in it? And I guess a follow-on question to that is, do they trust them yet, or do they still see it as like a research tool?
Mhm. So we're currently having research coordinators interact with it at this stage, not the clinicians, because it's the research coordinators who are doing a lot of hands-on, and it is fully transparent. I'm a huge believer that in transparency and the use of AI, especially in these kind of early days. We want to kind of ensure trust, and I think if you're not transparent about it, and that's the biggest way that you could lose trust early on. Um, so we have an interface where, it's, it's clear that we tell them that this is an AI kind of, the AI generated report. We show kind of where in the records the model is basing its final determinations on. And they have, the goal is not to replace the research coordinators. It's to augment them and allow them to do more with better quality, which will allow us to run more trials, find better treatments for patients at a larger scale. So we give the suggestion to the research coordinator, and they confirm or adjust it if needed.
Okay. Quick off the record, do you have a hard stop at 11?
I have to hop off probably by 11:15.
Okay, good. We got started late, so I don't want to cut this off prematurely. Um, what are
And
some
so,
conc-
sorry, I
Yep.
forgot to mention, and it's a little confusing because we're doing research on clinical research.
Yeah.
Um, we are still this is in the research phase.
Okay. Um, what are some concrete ways that your team is improving this signal to noise ratio in reporting? Is it generating views in EHR, generating PDF reports? How do your researchers currently interface with this technology?
We have it's implemented kind of within our system, totally behind the MGB firewall, and the notes are pulled on the patients on a trial and are surfaced in a kind of browser behind, again, totally behind MGB firewalls, where the clinical evidence, usually the note, is shown side by side with the AI system's determination, as well as I mentioned, kind of the highlighting which parts of the data is driving that determination. And so the research coordinator can see side by side the source data and the determination, and then make their final decision based on that.
Interesting. Yeah, I would imagine that in the process of doing this, you're obviously creating some tremendous value out of the data that you're collating and pulling together. Is there a process also for transforming that into a more structured system that can be used for other research and other purposes in the future?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So this has a kind of a dual use for retrospective research. So everything on the back end that we get from the clinical notes or the radiology, anything unstructured, um, the system automatically structures. The way we show it to the research coordinators is kind of informed by, we've done a lot of field studies with research coordinators to kind of figure out um, what's most useful to them. We show them kind of the more visual explanation of where these determinations come from, but on the back end, it is fully a structured database. And so this could theoretically be used for kind of run over historical data to collect the same information.
And how long has this project been running so far?
Yeah. So the project and it officially started last September. We're in the first year of it. We've made really a lot of progress in the first year, more than I even anticipated. I've had a great team working on it. Um, so we're currently we have we're we are running a clinical trial of this system to
A clinical
like a
trial of
meta
clinical
clinical
trials.
trial. Specifically, we're using it to see if it can help. As I mentioned, the focus of this grant is immunotherapy-related adverse events, and there is a biorepository being developed of immunotherapy-related adverse events. So once the patient, the goal is to collect blood samples, tissue samples on patients who experience these adverse events to better understand, what puts people at risk for it, and then, what might be potential better treatments for these adverse events. But these biorepositories have difficulty identifying the patients quickly enough after when they between the time when they develop the adverse event and being able to collect those samples. Because you want to do it, you want to collect the samples, at least the initial samples, after the adverse event, while in an active phase. So we are looking to see whether um, running our system improves the time to which we can find these patients and quickly get them registered onto the biobank to get those high quality samples.
And the reason why I asked how long the project's been running is because I was going to ask if you've had any positive signals so far, any great learnings or results. But obviously, you're less than a year into it, so you may not yet. But do you have anything that you've seen any positive trends?
We've seen so we've done more retrospective before we moved into the clinical trial. We've done kind of comparisons of research, and we're still kind of still finishing it. So those results, maybe stay tuned for the World Medical Innovation Forum. By then, we'll have full results, but we're doing comparisons of research coordinators alone versus research coordinators who are augmented by our system from using kind of historical patients to kind of simulate what might happen. And we're seeing that it, improves time by at least half. It improves the variability a lot between the research coordinators, and the accuracy of the system. Again, as I mentioned, it's especially for detection is really excellent. It's about 98% right
That's amazing. Congratulations on those results.
now.
So, if assuming that this technology works as you envision, how do you see the future of clinical trials in oncology changing once your technology's out there at scale? What's the future of state of the field and outcomes look like if we actually see this in a production setting?
Yeah. So I see this really accelerating the number of trials that we can run at different hospitals can run, because you can, for the same number of research coordinators, uh uh they can collect information on many more patients in the same amount of time. So I see allowing us to get to do open more clinical trials, and get more patients on clinical trials that way. I also see it improving as I mentioned, that quality of the adverse reporting, both by improving consistency. So at least that when you have two trials, that maybe you're comparing between two, results of two different trials, you can at least say, okay, at least I know these adverse events for both trials were reported in the same way, as opposed to really making it really difficult to know what they reported. You know, if if the team from trial A did the adverse event reporting for trial B, would that have changed the results? So I think they're really seeing us being able to better uh, put our finger down on this is the benefits of the strategy under investigation. These are the risks and most, here would help. These are the risks of the trial under investigation. Given those two, we can have a better shared decision making between clinicians and providers about a new treatment strategy. So I see a lot of benefit there, because again, we tend to have a less quantitative understanding of the risks of our different of our treatments. Speaking from as a radiation oncologist, you know, for where I see a lot of benefit kind of extending beyond the phase 2, 3 clinical trials for phase 4 pharmacovigilance, we can kind of now be able to automatically collect these signals and say, okay, here's over the long term, here are the potential risks and potential and benefits of a treatment, and then provide more clarity about that for our patients as well, which is going to only become more and more important as more patients survive longer with cancer. We're going to have more long-term survivors.
Yeah, and you mentioned patients there. I was going to ask you as a final question, how does this transform the patient experience? I mean, from my vantage point, it looks like clinicians will sound more informed, maybe better coordinated, maybe more insightful on what the patient is experiencing, what their journey looks like. Is this all part of the equation of why you see this transforming, not only from a reporting standpoint, from the actual experience from these patients going through the system?
Absolutely. And we don't have time to totally go into this, but we have, along the same line of interest, we have a project on using AI to help communicate information about clinical trials to patients and provide kind of a co-pilot for them on the side to help them, understand. So I could see in the future that those two coming together, being like, kind of providing information about the potential adverse events so they can better understand the risks of either the potential risks of the trial they're consenting to, so they know what they're getting into, which only in the long term that really empowers patients and allows them to make the decisions that work for them. And that ultimately leads to more trust in the healthcare system, and it improves healthcare overall for our patients. And then once they're on a trial, you could see it as a co-pilot for, helping them understand what, at different time points, what's going to be collected, what information is going to be collected on them, what it means if outcome A is found versus outcome B is found, really allowing them kind of 24/7 support and guidance on that as well. So that project is kind of just kicking off. I'm really excited about that as well, but there's a lot of ways that those two can synergize together.
Well, Danielle, thank you so much for being a part of this. I think your work is tremendous, and I congratulate you on the development so far. Looking forward to hearing more developments as we approach September, and I look forward to meeting you at the World Medical Innovation Forum.
Thanks so much. Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to meeting you as well.
That was Dr. Danielle Bitterman. Now, unnatural signals.
What stood out in this conversation is a subtle shift that's easy to miss. For a long time, progress in medicine has been slowed down not by discovery, but by the work required to prove it happened. Reporting, documentation, compliance, all necessary but heavy. Danielle's work shows what happens when the weight is redistributed. First, infrastructure becomes strategy. When outcomes can be captured automatically, innovation doesn't stall under its own paperwork. The system moves faster simply because less energy is wasted proving what already occurred. Second, trust becomes a real differentiator. As AI enters clinical workflows, the advantage doesn't come from using the models. It comes from knowing when not to trust them. The ability to monitor bias, error, and drift becomes just as important as performance. And third, the role of humans shifts upward. When machines handle extraction and monitoring, clinicians are free to do what only they can do: interpret, decide, and care, not replaced, refocused. This is what a system looks like when it stops collecting data for its own sake and starts turning attention into intelligence.
Thanks for listening to Unnatural Selection. If you enjoyed the episode, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone shaping the future. Explore more at unnaturalselection.net and connect with us on LinkedIn and Facebook. Until next time, keep evolving.